At the movie theater, a stranger sat down and whispered, "Everyone in this room will be dead in 20 minutes unless you help me." The seat next to me had been empty since the previews started, and I'd been grateful for the extra space to spread out with my jacket and drink. Then this guy appeared out of nowhere, sliding into the seat with urgent precision, leaning so close I could smell coffee on his breath. His whisper cut through the opening credits of the documentary I'd been waiting months to see. I turned to look at him, annoyed, ready to tell him to shut up or move, but his expression stopped me cold. He wasn't joking. His face was sheet white, covered in sweat despite the air conditioning, and his hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the armrest to steady them. "My name is Keith Langford," he continued in that same desperate whisper. "I work for Meridian Pharmaceutical. 3 days ago, I discovered they're planning to kill everyone in this theater to prevent the information in this documentary from reaching the public. The ventilation system has been rigged. At 8:47 p.m., exactly 20 minutes from now, it will release aerosolized VX nerve agent into this room. Everyone will be dead in under 3 minutes. You're sitting directly under one of the vents. You'll be among the first to die." I stared at him, my brain refusing to process what he was saying. This had to be a prank or a mental health crisis. People didn't poison entire movie theaters. That wasn't real life. "Listen to me." Keith grabbed my wrist, his grip desperate and clammy. "This documentary we're watching right now exposes Meridian's drug trials in Honduras. 47 children died because they rushed an approval process. The filmmakers have evidence that could bring down the entire company, put executives in prison for decades. I'm the facility manager who signed off on the ventilation modifications. I didn't know what I was approving. I thought it was a routine upgrade. Then, yesterday I overheard 2 men discussing the timeline. I checked the systems myself this morning and found the canisters hidden behind access panels. They're connected to a digital timer set for 8:47. When I tried to report it, my supervisor told me I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. When I insisted, he offered me $500,000 to disappear for a week. That's when I knew this was real. I pulled my wrist free, my heart starting to pound faster. "If this is real, why didn't you call the police? Why are you here talking to me?" Keith's expression crumbled. "I did call them. They took a report but said they'd send someone to investigate in the morning. I tried calling the FBI, but I got transferred 4 times, and nobody would take me seriously. I came here to pull the fire alarm myself, but there are 2 men watching the exits. They're Meridian security contractors. I recognize them from the corporate office. If I pull the alarm, they'll know I'm the leak, and they'll either kill me immediately or disappear the evidence and claim I was making false reports. I need someone else to trigger the evacuation, someone they don't know, someone who can get people moving before they realize what's happening." I checked my phone. 8:29 p.m. 18 minutes if he was telling the truth. The theater was packed, maybe 200 people here for the premiere screening of Honduras: The Cost of Progress. I'd driven 2 hours to attend because the filmmaker was supposed to be here for a Q&A afterward. Now this stranger was telling me everyone in this room would be dead in 18 minutes. "How do I know you're not insane?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Keith pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of what looked like industrial ventilation equipment. Behind an access panel, I could see 3 silver canisters connected to wires and a digital timer display showing 1943. That was taken 4 hours ago in the mechanical room on the 3rd floor. The timer is counting down. Right now it's under 18 minutes. Those canisters contain VX, one of the deadliest nerve agents ever created. A single drop on skin can kill an adult in minutes. Aerosolized in an enclosed space, it's instantaneous. I zoomed in on the photo. The timer looked professional, military grade. The canisters had warning labels I couldn't read in the image resolution, but they looked official. "Why me? Why not ask someone else?" Keith's voice cracked. "Because you're young, you're alone, and you're sitting in the middle section where you can reach the most people quickly. I've been watching everyone here for the past hour trying to figure out who might believe me and actually do something. Most people would freeze or argue or try to verify. We don't have time for that. I need someone who will act on instinct. Please, I'm begging you, help me save these people." The documentary continued playing on screen, showing footage of a clinic in Honduras. Children with IVs, doctors taking notes, Meridian Pharmaceutical logos on medication packages. The narrator was explaining how Meridian had conducted unauthorized trials of an experimental antibiotic, how they'd falsified consent forms, how children had died from side effects that were never reported to regulatory agencies. I'd read articles about this case. The filmmaker had spent 3 years investigating. This premiere was supposed to be the moment the full story finally became public. Keith was right about one thing. Meridian had billions at stake if this documentary exposed them. Even if I believe you, I said slowly, what's your plan? If I stand up and yell about a gas attack, people will panic. Someone could get trampled. And if those men at the exits are really security contractors, they'll stop anyone from leaving. Keith nodded. That's why we need to be strategic. You pull the fire alarm, which creates a legitimate reason for evacuation. While everyone's moving toward the exits, I slip away and call 911 from outside. Tell them there's a bomb. Threat. That gets police and fire department here fast. The contractors won't be able to stop a mass evacuation triggered by official alarm, and they can't kill everyone if we're already outside. By the time they realize what happened, we'll have first responders on scene who can investigate the ventilation system. I looked around the theater, trying to spot the security contractors Keith mentioned. There were 2 men standing near the exit doors, both wearing dark jackets despite the warm evening. They weren't watching the movie. They were watching the audience, their postures alert and professional. One of them was speaking into a radio clipped to his collar. What if you're wrong? I asked. What if this is all paranoia and there's no nerve agent? Keith met my eyes. Then I'll be arrested for making a false report. I'll lose my job and probably face charges, and you'll have interrupted a movie. But if I'm right and you do nothing, everyone in this room dies, including you, including me. The evidence in this documentary gets buried. Meridian gets away with killing 43 children in Honduras plus 200 people here. Which risk can you live with? I checked my phone again. 8:32 p.m. 15 minutes. My hands were sweating. I could feel my pulse in my throat. This felt insane. People didn't really do things like this. Corporations didn't murder entire theaters full of people. But then I thought about the news stories I'd read over the years. The opioid companies that had killed thousands while lying about addiction risks. The tobacco companies that had buried cancer research for decades. The pharmaceutical companies in other countries that had conducted illegal experiments on vulnerable populations. Why wouldn't they do this if they thought they could get away with it? The fire alarm, I said. Where's the closest one? Keith pointed toward the back of the theater, near the bathrooms. There's one in the hallway, about 30 feet past the exit doors. But the contractors will see you heading that direction. You need a reason to leave that doesn't look suspicious. I grabbed my phone and stood up, keeping my movements casual. Bathroom break. Nobody questions that. Keith caught my arm one more time. When the alarm goes off, get as many people moving as you can. Don't wait to see what happens. Just run and keep running until you're outside. If this goes wrong, if they realize what we're doing, they might activate the system early. I nodded and started making my way toward the aisle, mumbling apologies as I squeezed past the people between me and the exit. Every step felt surreal, my body moving on autopilot while my brain screamed that this couldn't be real. I passed rows of people completely absorbed in the documentary, eating popcorn, taking notes, filming the screen with their phones despite the no recording policy. None of them had any idea what Keith had just told me. None of them knew they might have 14 minutes left to live. I reached the exit doors and pushed through into the hallway. The contractors looked at me but didn't move to stop me. Just another person going to the bathroom. Normal behavior, nothing suspicious. I walked past them, turned the corner, and saw the fire alarm mounted on the wall 20 feet ahead. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. This was insane. I was about to pull a fire alarm based on the word of a complete stranger who claimed pharmaceutical companies were trying to murder everyone with nerve gas. If Keith was wrong or lying, I'd be arrested. I'd have a criminal record. My parents would be mortified. But if he was right and I did nothing, I'd be dead in 14 minutes along with everyone else in that theater. I reached the alarm, grabbed the handle, and froze. My hand wouldn't move. Some survival instinct was screaming at me that this was a mistake, that I was overreacting, that there had to be a better way to verify Keith's story before committing to this action. Then I thought about the photo he'd shown me, the timer counting down, the canisters, the professional setup. If someone had gone to that much trouble to rig the ventilation system, They weren't joking around. I pulled the alarm. The sound was deafening, shrieking through the hallway and into the theater. Emergency lights started strobing. I ran back toward the theater entrance, pushing through the doors to find people already standing, looking confused, gathering their belongings. "Everyone out!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Fire alarm! We need to evacuate now!" Most people started moving immediately. That instinctive obedience to fire alarms drilled into everyone from childhood. They filed toward the exits, some annoyed, some concerned, but mostly orderly. The contractors at the doors looked confused, speaking urgently into their radios. One of them stepped into the path of the evacuating crowd. "Everyone remain calm," he called out. "This is likely a false alarm. Please return to your seats while we investigate." Several people stopped, uncertain. The contractor's voice carried authority that made them want to obey. I pushed forward. "Are you serious? There's a fire alarm going off. We're leaving. Now." The contractor's hand went to something at his belt, and I realized with cold clarity that he was armed. Keith had been right about them. These weren't regular security guards. These were people prepared to stop an evacuation by force if necessary. Behind me, I heard Keith's voice shouting, "Everyone get out. This isn't a drill. There's a chemical leak in the ventilation system. You need to evacuate immediately." That got people moving faster. Chemical leak sounded worse than fire. The crowd surged toward the exits, pushing past the contractors who couldn't physically stop 200 people without revealing themselves as something other than legitimate security. I rode the wave of people out into the hallway, through the lobby, and out into the parking lot. The night air hit my face and I gasped, only then realizing I'd been holding my breath. People were gathering in confused clusters, some checking their phones, some heading toward their cars. The theater manager appeared, looking harried, asking what had happened. I looked at my phone. 8:38 p.m. 9 minutes until Keith's timer hit 0. If he was right, we had 9 minutes before VX nerve agent would have started pouring into that theater. 9 minutes before everyone would have started seizing and convulsing and dying. I scanned the crowd looking for Keith but couldn't see him. Then I heard sirens in the distance getting closer. Keith must have made his bomb threat call. Multiple emergency vehicles were approaching, fire trucks and police cars with lights flashing. The theater manager was trying to make an announcement, saying something about investigating the alarm, but nobody was listening. Everyone was watching the emergency vehicles pull into the parking lot. Firefighters in full gear started deploying, asking questions, establishing a perimeter. One of them approached me. "Did you pull the alarm?" I nodded. "There's a man named Keith Langford who says there's nerve gas in the ventilation system. He showed me photos of canisters rigged to a timer in the mechanical room." The firefighter's expression went from annoyed to deadly serious. "Where's this mechanical room?" I pointed toward the building. "Third floor," he said. "The timer is set to go off in about 8 minutes." The firefighter grabbed his radio and started calling for hazmat teams and bomb squad. Within seconds, the scene transformed from a routine fire alarm response to a major emergency operation. More vehicles arrived. People in hazmat suits started setting up decontamination stations. Police began pushing the crowd back, establishing a wider perimeter. I was pulled aside by a detective who identified herself as Lieutenant Carla Voss. She had the hardened look of someone who'd seen too much, but her questions were sharp and focused. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I walked her through the entire encounter with Keith. The whisper in the theater, the photos he'd shown me, the canisters, the timer, the contractors at the doors. She took notes without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she asked, "Where's Keith Langford now?" I looked around the parking lot again. Still no sign of him. "I don't know. He said he was going to call in a bomb threat to get emergency services here faster." Lieutenant Voss spoke into her radio, describing Keith, asking if anyone had seen him. The response came back negative. Nobody matching his description had been spotted outside. A firefighter in hazmat gear approached. "We've accessed the mechanical room on the 3rd floor. There are 3 canisters connected to a timer device. Timer shows 4 minutes and 37 seconds remaining. We need to know what we're dealing with before we approach." Lieutenant Voss turned to me. "Did Keith say what kind of nerve agent?" "VX. He said it was VX nerve agent, aerosolized." The firefighter swore and spoke urgently into his radio. VX was military-grade chemical weapon. If those canisters really contained VX and they ruptured, the entire building would be contaminated. Anyone exposed would die within minutes. There was no antidote, no effective treatment. The evacuation perimeter expanded immediately. Police started moving people back, cars being directed out of the parking lot entirely. The theater manager was arguing with someone, saying this was impossible, that his building had been thoroughly inspected. Lieutenant Voss asked me about the contractors, the two men at the doors. I described them as best I could. She sent officers to review security footage, to identify them, to figure out who they were working for. Then an officer approached with urgent news. We found a body in the basement. Adult male, single gunshot, wound to the head. Driver's license identifies him as Keith Langford, 41, facility manager for Meridian Pharmaceutical. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the asphalt, my brain refusing to process what I'd just heard. Keith was dead, but Keith had been sitting next to me 15 minutes ago. Keith had warned me. Keith had shown me photos. That's impossible, I said. He was in the theater. He sat next to me. He showed me his phone. Lieutenant Voss knelt down beside me. What did this man look like? The one who called himself Keith Langford? I described him. Average height, thin build, dark hair, glasses, maybe late 30s. Scared out of his mind, sweating, shaking. The officer who'd reported the body shook his head. The deceased doesn't match that description. Keith Langford is 6'2", heavily built, bald, no glasses, and based on body temperature, he's been dead for at least 6 hours. The world tilted sideways. Someone else had impersonated Keith. Someone had used his name, his employment, his inside knowledge to convince me to evacuate the theater. But if it wasn't really Keith Langford, then who was it? And why would they want to evacuate the theater if they were the ones who'd planted the nerve gas? Unless. My stomach dropped as another possibility occurred to me. What if evacuating the theater was the real goal? What if this entire thing was about getting everyone outside for some other reason? I grabbed Lieutenant Voss's arm. The documentary. The filmmaker. Was the filmmaker here tonight? She pulled out her phone, checking something. Documentary filmmaker Alana Cortez was scheduled to appear for Q&A after the screening. Why? What if the nerve gas isn't the real threat? What if someone wanted everyone evacuated so they could get to the filmmaker specifically? Or what if they wanted us all in one place, outside, for some other reason? Lieutenant Voss's eyes widened. She grabbed her radio. Find Alana Cortez immediately. Full protective. Detail. And get me a full sweep of the parking lot for secondary devices. Officers scattered, searching the crowd. I stood up, scanning faces, trying to find the man who'd called himself Keith Langford. If he'd manipulated me into pulling the fire alarm, he had to be out here somewhere watching the results of his plan unfold. I spotted movement near the edge of the parking lot, a figure in dark clothing moving between cars, too deliberately, too focused. I pointed. There. That man in the black jacket. I think that's him. Lieutenant Voss followed my gaze and immediately called for backup. Officers moved to intercept, but the figure saw them coming and ran. A chase erupted across the parking lot, officers pursuing, radios crackling with updates. The man was fast, weaving between vehicles, heading toward the street. Then I heard shouting from the opposite direction. "Everyone down! Gun!" People scattered, screaming. I hit the ground as gunshots cracked through the air. 3 shots. 4. 5. Return fire from police. Then silence. Lieutenant Voss was on top of me, shielding my body with hers, her radio pressed against her cheek as she called for officers down, shots fired, requesting ambulances. Slowly, carefully, we stood up. Across the parking lot, 2 bodies were down. One was a woman I'd seen in the theater, a middle-aged woman who'd been sitting 3 rows ahead of me. Now she was lying on the asphalt with officers surrounding her, blood spreading beneath her body. The other was the man who'd impersonated Keith Langford. He'd been shot multiple times during the chase and had collapsed between 2 cars. Officers were approaching cautiously, weapons drawn, checking for threats. I felt numb, disconnected from my body. The woman who'd been shot was the real target. This whole thing, the fake Keith Langford, the nerve gas threat, the evacuation, Everything had been orchestrated to get her outside where she'd be exposed and vulnerable. "That's Alana Cortez," someone said. "The filmmaker." She'd been in the theater the entire time, sitting in the audience watching her own documentary. The man who'd impersonated Keith had known she'd be there. He'd created an elaborate scheme to evacuate everyone, knowing she'd come outside with the crowd, knowing he could target her in the chaos. The hazmat team was still dealing with the canisters upstairs. The timer had been stopped with 43 seconds remaining. Preliminary testing showed the canisters did contain VX nerve agent, professionally manufactured and rigged to a sophisticated delivery system. Someone had absolutely intended to kill everyone in that theater. But the man who'd warned me about it had also been working for the people who'd planted it. He'd created a false identity, used real insider knowledge, manipulated me into evacuating the building so their real target would be exposed. Now Alana Cortez was dying on the pavement, and Keith Langford, the real Keith Langford, was dead in the basement, probably killed when he'd discovered the actual plot. The man who'd impersonated him was dead too, shot by police during the chase. I'd been a pawn in something I still didn't fully understand. Ambulances arrived, paramedics rushing to Alana Cortez. They worked on her for 8 minutes before loading her into the ambulance and racing away, sirens wailing. Lieutenant Voss pulled me aside, away from the chaos. "I need you to think very carefully. Did the man who called himself Keith say anything else? Any other details that might help us understand what happened here?" I tried to remember the conversation, pulling apart every sentence. He'd said he worked for Meridian Pharmaceutical. He'd said he'd discovered the nerve gas plot. He'd said contractors were watching the exits. He'd said I needed to pull the fire alarm to evacuate everyone. But he'd never actually said he wanted to save everyone. He'd said he needed my help to evacuate the theater. He'd needed me to get everyone outside. "He used me," I said, the realization settling like ice in my chest. He knew I'd pull the alarm if he convinced me the theater was going to be gassed. He knew everyone would evacuate. He knew the filmmaker would come outside with everyone else. The whole thing was a setup to get her into the open. Lieutenant Voss nodded grimly. The real Keith Langford discovered something. Based on the timeline, he probably found the canisters this morning and tried to report it, just like the impersonator claimed. But when he tried to do something about it, someone killed him. Then they sent in a cleaner who knew enough details to impersonate him convincingly. The cleaner's job was to make sure the documentary premiere was disrupted and the filmmaker was neutralized. The nerve gas was real insurance. If Alana didn't come outside, everyone would die anyway, destroying the documentary and eliminating all the witnesses who'd seen it. I felt sick. So by evacuating everyone, I saved them from the nerve gas but made Alana an easier target. Lieutenant Voss squeezed my shoulder. "You made the only choice you could with the information you had. If you'd done nothing, 200 people would be dead right now. Instead, 199 are alive. That's not nothing." But it felt like nothing. It felt like I'd been manipulated into helping assassinate someone who'd spent 3 years investigating child deaths. Someone who'd risked everything to expose Meridian Pharmaceuticals' crimes. The emergency responders secured the scene over the next hour. The VX canisters were carefully removed by military disposal experts. The building was declared contaminated and would require extensive decontamination before anyone could safely enter again. The bodies were processed. Evidence was collected. Lieutenant Voss kept me there, taking my statement, going over every detail multiple times. She recorded everything, had me look at photos, tried to identify the impersonator from any database they could access. He had no identification, no phone, no wallet. His fingerprints weren't in any system. Professional. Ghost. I was still there when news came from the hospital. Alana Cortez had died during surgery. The bullets had hit major organs. She'd never regained consciousness. Her documentary, which the world was supposed to see tonight, would never be released as intended. The master files had been stored in the theater's projection booth, and the VX contamination meant they couldn't be safely retrieved. Digital backups existed somewhere, probably, but the premiere moment was gone. The public exposure event had been successfully destroyed. Meridian Pharmaceutical issued a statement within hours expressing shock and horror at the attempted terrorist attack on a theater, showing a documentary critical of their company. They pledged full cooperation with investigators and offered a $1 million reward for information leading to the arrest of whoever had planted the nerve gas. The statement was perfectly crafted, positioning them as victims of violence rather than perpetrators. It made me want to scream. By 11 p.m., Lieutenant Voss finally let me go home. She drove me personally, not trusting me to drive in my current state. "We'll be investigating Meridian," she said as we pulled up to my apartment. "Full federal investigation. This kind of operation required resources, planning, inside access. We'll find the connections." I nodded, not believing her. Companies like Meridian had lawyers, money, political connections. They'd bury evidence, pay settlements, claim rogue actors, and emerge mostly unscathed. They always did. I went inside and sat on my couch for 3 hours, staring at nothing, replaying every moment of the evening. The stranger sitting down beside me, his desperate whisper, the photo of the timer, my decision to believe him, the fire alarm, the evacuation, the gunshots, Alana Cortez dying on the pavement. I'd saved 199 people and helped kill one. The math worked out in favor of pulling the alarm, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd been weaponized by people who understood exactly how I'd react to a crisis. They'd played me perfectly. My phone rang at 3 a.m., unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" A woman's voice, strained and tired. "Is this the person who evacuated the theater?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Diana Langford, Keith's wife. The police told me what happened, that someone impersonated my husband to manipulate you. I wanted to call because I need you to understand something. Keith was a good man. When he found those canisters, he tried to do the right thing. He called the police, he called the FBI, he even tried calling the theater directly. They killed him for it, shot him and left him in a basement. I'm telling you this because I don't want his death to be meaningless. Someone needs to know that he tried." I listened to her cry for 5 minutes, offering inadequate words of comfort. When she finally hung up, I sat holding my phone, thinking about Keith Langford, the real one, who'd discovered a murder plot and died trying to stop it. Thinking about Alana Cortez, who'd spent 3 years investigating pharmaceutical crimes and died before she could share her findings. Thinking about the 43 children in Honduras who died during illegal drug trials. All of them dead because Meridian Pharmaceutical had decided their lives were acceptable losses in pursuit of profit. I opened my laptop and started searching for Alana Cortez's work. I found her previous documentaries, her investigative journalism, her social media accounts. She'd been documenting pharmaceutical abuses for a decade. The Honduras story was supposed to be her masterpiece, the case that would finally force accountability. I found backup files she'd posted months ago, preview clips and interviews, transcripts of documents. The full documentary might be locked in a contaminated theater, but pieces of it existed scattered across the internet. I started downloading everything, archiving it, making sure it couldn't disappear. By sunrise, I had assembled a rough timeline of Alana's investigation and began sharing it with journalists I found who'd covered pharmaceutical industry corruption. Most ignored me. 2 asked for more information. 1, a reporter named Griffin Hayes from a national newspaper, called me directly. "You're the theater evacuator," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I've been up all night trying to piece together what happened. The official story doesn't make sense. Can you walk me through exactly what occurred?" I told him everything. The stranger who'd called himself Keith Langford, the photos of the canisters, the timer, the evacuation, the shooting, the real Keith in the basement, the contamination preventing access to Alana's documentary files. Griffin listened without interrupting, occasionally typing, piecing together the narrative. "Meridian's involvement isn't speculation," he said when I finished. "I've been investigating them for 2 years. They have a history of silencing whistleblowers. 3 people who testified about their Honduras trials died under suspicious circumstances. Car accidents, sudden illnesses, 1 apparent suicide. Alana was supposed to be more careful. She had security, she varied her routines, she kept her files backed up in multiple locations, but she never expected them to use nerve gas on a theater full of people. I told him about the archived files I'd been collecting from Alana's previous posts. He said he'd been doing the same thing, that he had contacts who'd been helping preserve her work. "We're going to publish everything," Griffin said. "Full investigation, timeline of Meridian's crimes, evidence of the theater attack, your testimony about what happened. I can't promise it'll lead to prosecutions, but we'll make sure people know the truth. The story ran 3 days, later as a front-page feature. Pharmaceutical giant linked to theater nerve gas attack. Griffin had assembled an overwhelming case connecting Meridian to the plot. Financial records showing payments to the impersonator through shell companies. Security footage from the theater showing Meridian contractors installing the canisters weeks earlier. Testimony from Keith Langford's co-workers about his discovery and his attempts to report it. My account of the evacuation. Photos of the VX canisters. Timeline of Alana Cortez's investigation. Evidence of the Honduras drug trials and the children who died. The article went viral immediately. Within 24 hours, Meridian's stock had dropped 40%. Federal prosecutors announced criminal investigations. The company's CEO resigned. Board members started making deals, turning on each other, providing evidence in exchange for immunity. The pharmaceutical industry lobby tried to contain the damage, arguing this was an isolated incident by rogue employees. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Other victims of pharmaceutical abuse started coming forward. More journalists started investigating. More evidence surfaced. What had started as one documentary about Honduras became a systemic exposure of an industry that had spent decades putting profits above human lives. I testified before a grand jury 3 weeks later. The proceedings were sealed, but prosecutors told me afterward that my testimony had been crucial in establishing the timeline and the intent behind the theater attack. 15 Meridian executives were indicted on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to chemical weapons violations. The trials took 18 months. I attended as much as I could, sitting in the courtroom watching prosecutors dismantle Meridian's defense. The company's lawyers tried everything, claiming the executives had no knowledge of the theater plot, that rogue security contractors had acted independently, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the financial records were too clear, the communications too damning, the pattern too obvious. One by one, the executives were convicted. The CEO got life in prison without parole. 6 others got sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. Meridian Pharmaceutical was dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay settlements to victims' families. The Honduras families received compensation. Alana Cortez's family received a settlement. Diana Langford, Keith's widow, received recognition that her husband had died a hero. The money didn't bring anyone back, but it was something. A year after the theater attack, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a flash drive. When I opened it on my computer, I found the complete, unedited version of Alana Cortez's documentary. A note was included. Found this in Alana's cloud backup. She would have wanted it seen. The password is justice. Share it everywhere. I uploaded the documentary to every platform I could find. It spread across the internet in hours, millions of people watching the 3-hour investigation into Meridian's crimes. The Honduras footage, the interviews with families, the documents proving systematic fraud, the evidence of covered-up deaths. Everything Alana had worked 3 years to compile, finally reaching the public she'd died trying to inform. The documentary won multiple posthumous awards. Film festivals created a scholarship in Alana's name for investigative filmmakers. Keith Langford's name was cleared, his actions recognized as an attempted whistleblower who'd paid the ultimate price. The 43 children who'd died in Honduras were memorialized, their families were interviewed, their stories were told. I went back to my normal life, or tried to. But nothing felt normal after that night. I couldn't go to movies without scanning for threats. I couldn't trust strangers who approached me with urgent information. I jumped at loud noises, woke up from nightmares. About nerve gas and timers counting down. My therapist said I had PTSD from the trauma, that it was normal given what I'd experienced. She taught me coping mechanisms, helped me process the guilt about Alana's death, reminded me that I'd saved 199 lives. But I kept thinking about the 43 children in Honduras, about Keith Langford bleeding out in a basement, about Alana Cortez dying on the pavement, about all the times pharmaceutical companies had put profit above human life and gotten away with it because no one had stopped them in time. 5 years after the theater attack, I started working for a pharmaceutical oversight nonprofit. Not because I'd overcome my trauma, but because I'd learned to channel it. We investigate drug trials, monitor company practices, advocate for stronger regulations. It's frustrating work, fighting an industry with infinite resources and political connections. But every time we force a company to pull an unsafe drug or expose fraudulent research, I think about that stranger who sat down next to me and whispered that everyone would be dead in 20 minutes unless I helped him. I think about how I pulled that fire alarm without knowing if I was saving lives or ruining my own. I think about the decision we all face when we see corruption and have to choose between speaking up and staying silent. Griffin Hayes became a close friend. We'd both spent years now investigating pharmaceutical corruption, him through journalism, me through advocacy. We collaborated on cases, shared information, supported each other through the exhaustion of fighting systems designed to crush people who challenge them. He told me once that the theater attack had changed how he approached every story, that he could never again treat corporate malfeasance as just business news when real people died from executive decisions. Last month, the final Meridian executive was released from prison after serving his minimum sentence. He gave an interview claiming he'd been scapegoated, that he'd known nothing about the theater plot, that he'd been a victim of overzealous prosecution. The interview made me angry for days. This man who'd helped cover up child deaths and plan mass murder now playing victim from his comfortable post-prison life. But then I received an email from someone I'd never met, a pharmaceutical researcher who'd been following the Meridian case and had discovered similar fraud at his own company. He had evidence, he said. Falsified trial data, covered up deaths, rushed approvals. He was ready to blow the whistle but didn't know who to trust. Could I help him? I forwarded his email to Griffin, to the prosecutors who'd handled the Meridian case, to the FDA whistleblower division. Within a week, a new investigation had launched. Within a month, another pharmaceutical company was facing scrutiny. It wouldn't bring back the dead, wouldn't undo the trauma, wouldn't erase the memory of that night at the theater. But it was something. A chain reaction started by a stranger's whisper in a dark theater, by a decision to pull a fire alarm when every instinct said to freeze, by a choice to believe that individual action could matter in the face of institutional evil. Sometimes I wonder about parallel timelines, versions of that night, where I made different choices, where I ignored the stranger and everyone died from nerve gas, where I hesitated and Alana Cortez survived, where I panicked and caused a stampede, where Keith Langford had successfully reported the plot earlier and prevented everything. But those timelines don't exist. This one does, with its specific casualties and survivors, its specific outcomes and consequences. All I could do was live in this timeline and try to make it mean something that I'd been in that theater at that moment with that stranger who'd weaponized my conscience to serve a murder plot that I'd somehow survived and turned into something else. 20 minutes. That's all it had been. 20 minutes between the whisper and the evacuation, between life and death, between complicity and action. 20 minutes that had defined everything that came after. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.